When Thomas Gray, a self-made millionaire with no children of his own, made a decision to hire a woman to bear his child, no one could have predicted how drastically it would change his life. It wasn't for love or family. Thomas had long ago abandoned the idea of a traditional home. He had made his fortune through sheer will, and in his eyes, family was just another distraction. But as he approached middle age, a strange emptiness began to creep into his heart. A desire to leave behind something more than just money. That's when he came up with the plan. He would find a woman willing to carry his child, someone with no expectations, no romantic interests, and no strings attached. A business arrangement. It wasn't uncommon, he thought. Many men in his position did the same. The child would be raised by a professional nanny, and Thomas would step in when necessary, but he'd have the opportunity to share his legacy without the emotional entanglements of a traditional family. The woman he found wasn't what he expected either. Emma was young, independent, and very much in need of money. A chance like this was an offer she couldn't refuse. Her life wasn't easy, and the prospect of carrying a child for a millionaire offered a level of stability she had never known. She didn't question the arrangement, at least not at first. For her, it was a business transaction. She would give birth to the child, and in return, she would receive a generous sum of money. It was clean. Simple. But as the months went on, Emma began to feel something she hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just her body growing with life, it was her heart. She found herself wondering what it would feel like to raise the child herself. What kind of parent would she be? What kind of life could she give this baby? It was too late to back out now, but the bond between mother and child was undeniable. Thomas, on the other hand, never thought he would become attached. He paid the medical bills, monitored the progress, and made sure everything was in order, but he kept his distance emotionally. The child would be his, but he would be the distant, hands-off father. He had convinced himself that this was the way it should be. But when the day arrived, and Emma went into labor, Thomas was forced to confront something he hadn't anticipated. As Emma gave birth in a sterile hospital room, the weight of the moment suddenly hit him. The child he had expected to be just a formality, a distant legacy, was real. He could hear the baby's first cries, and a rush of emotions he hadn't prepared for flooded through him. The baby was born healthy, but there was something different. Thomas didn't know what it was at first, but the moment he laid eyes on the infant, his heart stopped. The features were unmistakable, nothing about the baby looked like either Emma or him. It was as though the child had come from somewhere else entirely. What was he seeing? He couldn't comprehend it. The doctors quickly assured him that everything was normal, but in his gut, Thomas felt a growing unease. There was a feeling in the air, a sense that something was wrong. Emma, too, seemed confused, though she tried to hide it. But deep inside, they both knew that life was about to take a turn neither of them could predict. In that moment, Thomas made a vow. He would find out what was going on. He had the resources, the drive, and the determination to get to the bottom of it. Whatever it was, he wouldn't stop until he understood the truth. But neither Thomas nor Emma knew yet that their worlds were about to be turned upside down, and that the baby in their arms would lead them down a path neither had anticipated. In the days following the birth, Thomas could not shake the strange sensation that something was off. The baby, a healthy girl with dark, mysterious eyes, seemed to captivate him in ways he didn't fully understand. It wasn't just the lack of resemblance between the child and either of her biological parents, it was something more. Something intangible that gnawed at him from the inside out. The doctors assured him everything was normal. They checked the baby's vitals, and everything appeared healthy. But no matter how hard he tried to rationalize it, Thomas couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in the pit of his stomach. The baby didn't look like either of them, and in the quiet moments when he gazed down at her, something told him that this was no ordinary child. It wasn't just her eyes, though they were unlike anything he'd ever seen. The child's features were too perfect, too striking to be explained by mere genetics. Her skin was flawless, her face angelic. Even her delicate fingers seemed to glow. Thomas couldn't help but feel as if he was witnessing something out of the ordinary, something destined for greatness, yet cloaked in mystery. Emma, too, was beginning to feel the weight of it all. The bond she had formed with the child during her pregnancy was undeniable. She had carried this baby for 9 months, and despite the deal they had struck, she couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of love for her daughter. But as much as she tried to push these feelings aside, she began to notice strange things as well. The baby was unnaturally calm, even in the most stressful situations. When she cried, it was not the usual cry of an infant. It was soft, melodic, a sound that seemed to resonate deep within their hearts. But it wasn't just her demeanor that made Emma uneasy. It was the child's extraordinary physical traits that didn't belong in this world. Thomas was busy with his business empire, but he couldn't ignore the fact that something was wrong. He had arranged for the child to undergo standard health checks, but the pediatricians and specialists he consulted were all baffled. They could find nothing physically wrong with the baby, but they couldn't explain her peculiar characteristics either. It wasn't until one night, after a particularly tense board meeting, that Thomas decided to visit the child's nursery. His mind raced with unanswered questions as he approached the crib. Emma was asleep in her room, and the house was eerily quiet. He peered into the nursery, watching the baby sleep peacefully. And then, as if sensing his gaze, the baby's eyes fluttered open. Their deep, intelligent gaze met his, and in that moment, he felt something stir within him, a cold, unsettling shiver. He had seen the baby's eyes 1,000 times before, but tonight, they were different. They weren't just curious. They were knowing. As though this infant understood everything about him, about the world. It was a look that sent chills down his spine. "Emma," he whispered under his breath, though he knew she wouldn't hear him. He stepped closer to the crib, unable to tear his eyes away. The baby blinked, and for a moment, Thomas felt a surge of panic, a brief, inexplicable terror. He quickly turned and left the room, his heart pounding in his chest. What had just happened? Was it all in his head? Or was there something far deeper, far more extraordinary at play here? The next morning, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling. He spent the day in meetings, but his mind kept wandering back to the baby. He felt a desperate need to uncover the truth about her origins. But what was he really searching for? Was he simply looking for an explanation, or was there something else, something even more unsettling, that he wasn't prepared to face? Emma could sense the change in him. She noticed his unease, his constant tension. He asked her questions she didn't have answers to, questions about the pregnancy, about the child's genetics. It seemed as though Thomas was becoming obsessed, unable to let go of the strange sense of mystery that surrounded his daughter. And that's when Emma began to feel it too. She had always known there was something unusual about this child, but she had pushed those thoughts aside. Now, the reality of the situation was becoming harder and harder to ignore. The child wasn't just special, she was different. But how? And why? As the days passed, both Thomas and Emma found themselves drawn deeper into the enigma of the child's existence. And neither of them knew yet that the truth they sought was something neither of them could have possibly imagined. As weeks passed, the unease only deepened. Thomas couldn't escape the feeling that something was terribly wrong. He had always prided himself on being a man of logic and reason, but this child, his daughter, defied all explanation. The more he learned, the less he understood. The baby's unusual traits continued to baffle him. Her intelligence was beyond anything he had ever seen in a child so young. At just 3 months old, she was already grasping at objects with remarkable precision, staring at them with a level of concentration that sent shivers down his spine. She didn't cry like most babies, but rather, she made soft, almost musical sounds that seemed to soothe anyone who heard them. Thomas noticed her calm demeanor in even the most stressful situations. While other babies would have been fussy during noisy family gatherings, she remained serene, her eyes watching everything with an unsettling level of awareness. Emma, too, couldn't ignore the strange feelings brewing within her. Though she had initially embraced the arrangement as a business deal, she had become deeply attached to the child. Every moment spent with her daughter revealed something extraordinary, something she couldn't quite understand. There was a warmth in the child's presence, but also a distance, an air of mystery that Emma couldn't shake. One night, as Thomas stared at the baby through the nursery window, a thought occurred to him, one that he had tried to dismiss for days. What if this child wasn't his? The idea seemed preposterous at first. After all, he had paid for the pregnancy, ensured that everything was in order. But now, looking at her, something told him that she didn't belong to him in any way he understood. He had the resources, and if there was one thing Thomas Gray knew how to do, it was get to the truth. He called in a team of geneticists, discreetly commissioning them to run a full DNA test. The results came back within days, and the answer shocked him to his core. There were anomalies in the baby's DNA, genetic markers that couldn't be explained. Some of them matched no known human genome. Thomas wasn't the only one feeling a sense of dread. Emma, too, was beginning to notice strange occurrences. The baby's eyes, those haunting, dark eyes, seemed to follow her, almost as if the child was trying to communicate without words. When Emma placed her hand on the baby's head, she swore she felt a strange warmth, as if an unseen force was emanating from the child. It wasn't like anything she had ever experienced before. One morning, as Emma changed her daughter's clothes, she noticed something new. A small, faint scar just behind the baby's ear. It wasn't something that could have been caused by birth, it was an unnatural mark, too precise, too deliberate to be a natural part of birth. Emma's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't ignore it anymore. The baby wasn't like any other child. And there was a growing sense that the truth was far more complicated than either of them could have anticipated. The moment Emma approached Thomas to tell him about the scar, he interrupted her with the results of the DNA test. "It's not possible," he muttered, his face pale. "This child's DNA doesn't match either of ours. There's something more, something I can't explain." Emma's heart pounded as she tried to process what Thomas had just told her. Was it possible? Was their daughter really not their daughter? But there was more to the story. Thomas's next words made her blood run cold. "Do you realize what this means, Emma? This child, she's not just unusual. She might not even be human." The words hung in the air like a thick fog, and Emma felt the weight of them pressing down on her chest. She wanted to deny it, to laugh it off as some strange misunderstanding. But deep down, she knew there was something undeniably different about the child. They decided to consult a team of doctors and specialists, geneticists, pediatricians, even neurologists. Each of them examined the baby in turn, and each of them was baffled. There were no explanations for her extraordinary traits, and there were no answers for the strange anomalies in her DNA. It wasn't just her physical traits, it was something more intangible. Every test, every examination, only left more questions in their wake. How could this child exist? And why was she so different? As the days turned into weeks, Thomas's obsession with the truth grew. He began poring over genetic research, looking for any clue that might explain what was happening. Meanwhile, Emma felt her own attachment to the baby grow deeper. Despite everything, despite the fear, she couldn't help but love her daughter. She was everything to Emma now. But with every passing day, the fear that had once been a small seed in the back of Thomas's mind was beginning to grow. There was something far more complex at play here. Something neither of them was prepared for. One afternoon, as Thomas sat hunched over his desk, his phone rang. It was a call he wasn't expecting, one that would change everything. The voice on the other end was calm, but the news it carried was nothing short of earth-shattering. "I think you need to see this," the voice said. "We've found something." The call was enough to stop Thomas in his tracks. The voice on the other end of the line belonged to Dr. Jensen, one of the leading geneticists who had been running tests on the baby. The urgency in his tone was impossible to ignore. "I think you need to see this," he repeated, his voice tight with tension. "We've found something." Thomas's heart raced as he grabbed his coat and rushed to the lab. His mind was racing with questions. What had they found? Could it be some simple mistake, some error in the testing process? Or had they discovered something that would change everything? When he arrived at the lab, Dr. Jensen greeted him with a somber look. "We've gone over everything multiple times," Dr. Jensen said, leading him to a monitor where a detailed genetic report was displayed. "I don't know how to explain this, Thomas. It's beyond anything we've encountered before." Thomas leaned in, his eyes scanning the results. The DNA sequence was like nothing he had ever seen. At first glance, it appeared to be a normal human genome, but as he dug deeper, he noticed the anomalies. There were sequences, strands of DNA, that did not belong to any known species on Earth. They were foreign. Foreign to the point where they couldn't be identified. "Are you telling me this child is—" Thomas couldn't finish the sentence. He couldn't bring himself to say it aloud. Dr. Jensen hesitated. "It's possible. But I can't say for sure. What I do know is this: the child's genome contains patterns that don't belong to any known human being. It's as if there's a completely different species mixed in, something we've never seen before. It's almost like she's not entirely human." Thomas felt his knees weaken. The words hit him like a freight train. Not human? How was that possible? How could a child he had believed to be his daughter be anything but human? The questions swirled in his mind, and panic began to take hold. The implications were vast, far beyond anything he had imagined when he first arranged for this child to be born. The deal had been simple: he would have a child, a legacy of sorts, and that would be the end of it. But this revelation threatened to unravel everything he had believed about his world. But it wasn't just the genetic report that shook him. There was more. Dr. Jensen opened a second file on the screen, showing images from a special MRI scan they had conducted on the baby's brain. The results were startling. The baby's brain activity was far more advanced than it should have been for an infant of her age. In fact, the activity levels were closer to those of a fully grown adult, an adult with an exceptionally high level of intelligence. Thomas's mind reeled. A child who wasn't just physically different but also intellectually advanced beyond her years? This was beyond anything he could have ever imagined. The possibilities were endless, and yet, all of them were terrifying. "Is there any chance this could be a mistake?" Thomas asked, his voice hoarse. He needed to hear something, anything, that could make this all seem like a misunderstanding. Dr. Jensen shook his head. "I don't believe so, Thomas. I've consulted with the best minds in the field, and they've all come to the same conclusion. The DNA is unlike anything we've ever seen. This isn't human, at least not in the way we understand it." The words hung in the air, suffocating him. Not human. Where did she come from? Thomas whispered, almost to himself. Dr. Jensen didn't answer immediately. He turned to look at the computer screen, his brow furrowed in thought. "I don't know," he said slowly. "But there's one thing I'm sure of: this child was born for a reason. Something is happening here, something bigger than any of us can understand." That night, as Thomas lay awake in bed, his mind spinning with the knowledge Dr. Jensen had given him, Emma slept beside him, unaware of the true nature of their daughter. He glanced at her face, peaceful and serene in sleep, and for a moment, he felt the weight of everything pressing down on him. This was no ordinary child. But what was she? And why was she here? The next morning, Emma noticed a change in Thomas. He seemed distant, his thoughts far away as he stared out the window. She didn't know what was wrong, but the unease in him was palpable. "I need to talk to you," Thomas said quietly, after a long silence. "About our daughter." Emma felt her stomach tighten. The fear, the confusion, they were growing, and she could no longer deny it. She had felt the same strange sense of something being off, but now, it was impossible to ignore. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Thomas paused, then slowly turned to face her. "Emma, our daughter, she's not human. At least, not in the way we understand it." Emma's heart skipped a beat. She wanted to argue, to say that Thomas was just being paranoid, that he was overthinking it, but as she looked into his eyes, she saw the truth in them. The truth that neither of them could avoid any longer. She took a deep breath. "What does that mean, Thomas?" Thomas ran a hand through his hair, his face pale. "It means that everything we thought we knew, about her, about us, has been turned upside down. This child is part of something bigger. Something we can't explain." The words seemed to hang in the air, heavy with meaning. And neither of them knew yet how far down this rabbit hole would take them. The next few days were a blur for Thomas and Emma. The revelation about their daughter left them in a whirlwind of confusion, fear, and disbelief. Neither of them knew how to move forward, how to process the impossible reality they were now facing. The uncertainty weighed on them both, creating a growing divide between them. Thomas became increasingly withdrawn, lost in his thoughts, unable to focus on anything other than the mystery surrounding his daughter. His once unwavering confidence had been shattered. His world, built on logic and order, was now teetering on the edge of the unknown. Emma, on the other hand, struggled with her own feelings. She had grown attached to the child, this strange, beautiful little girl who seemed so full of potential. How could she possibly be anything but human? And yet, the truth was undeniable. Every instinct told her that something was terribly wrong, but at the same time, she couldn't bring herself to see her daughter as anything other than her own flesh and blood. The tension between Thomas and Emma reached a breaking point one evening as they sat in the living room. The child was sleeping soundly in the nursery, oblivious to the storm that was brewing just a few feet away. Emma had noticed the change in Thomas, how distant he had become, how obsessed he was with the tests and the strange anomalies in the baby's DNA. But she had remained silent, hoping that somehow, they could find a way to move past it. But now, it seemed impossible to ignore the truth any longer. "You've been distant for days, Thomas," Emma finally said, her voice trembling. "What's really going on? What are you not telling me?" Thomas turned to face her, his eyes heavy with the weight of everything he had learned. "I've been trying to make sense of this. I don't understand it, Emma. I don't know what we've created here." "Created?" Emma echoed, a sharp edge to her voice. "She's our daughter, Thomas. Our daughter. You can't just talk about her like she's some project." "I'm not." Thomas stopped himself, taking a deep breath before continuing. "I'm not saying she's not our daughter. But she's not like other children. I've seen the evidence, Emma. Her DNA, it's not human. And I don't know what that means for us, for her." Emma felt her heart tighten. She stood up, pacing the room. "You're telling me that we've spent months loving her, caring for her, and now you want to say she's not even human?" Her voice cracked, and she struggled to keep her emotions in check. "What if she's not some experiment, Thomas? What if she's just different? That doesn't mean she's not ours." Thomas stood up, his hands trembling. "I don't know what she is, Emma. But I can't keep pretending that everything is fine when it's not. I need answers. And I'm not going to just sit here and ignore the facts. She's not like any child I've ever known. She's not like any human being I've ever known." The words hung in the air like a heavy fog. Emma's chest tightened with a mix of confusion and hurt. She couldn't fathom what Thomas was saying. How could he be so cold, so analytical about their daughter? The love she felt for the baby ran so deep. Wasn't that enough to prove that she was real, that she was human? "What do you want from me, Thomas?" Emma asked, her voice shaking with emotion. "I'm just trying to understand. I'm trying to make sense of this too. But I can't do it without you. I can't do it if you keep pushing me away." Thomas's face softened for a moment, but the doubt and fear still lingered in his eyes. "I don't want to push you away. I don't. But I can't keep pretending like everything's normal when I don't know what's happening. I don't know if she's safe. I don't know if I can protect her if we don't even understand what she is." Tears welled in Emma's eyes as she took a step closer to him. "She's our daughter, Thomas. I don't care what her DNA says. I don't care if she's different. She's ours, and we are her parents. Don't you see that? She's not some experiment. She's a human being." For a moment, Thomas stood frozen, torn between the woman he loved and the child that had somehow entered his life, shattering everything he thought he knew about the world. The weight of the situation was almost unbearable. What was he supposed to do? What was he supposed to feel? "I don't know, Emma," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I don't know what to believe anymore." Emma looked at him, her heart aching. "We'll figure it out together. But you have to stop shutting me out. We need to face this, as a family. If she's different, then we'll find out why. But she's our daughter, and nothing will change that." For a long moment, Thomas said nothing. Then, slowly, he nodded. "You're right. I've been pushing this all away. But I can't keep doing that. I'll figure this out. I promise." Emma took a deep breath, wiping away the tears that had slipped down her cheeks. "We'll do it together." And for the first time in days, there was a sense of relief between them. The confrontation had been painful, but it had forced them both to confront the truth. They were in this together, no matter how difficult the journey ahead would be. As they stood there in the quiet room, the baby's soft cries echoed from the nursery. Neither of them knew what the future held for their family, but one thing was certain: they would face it together. No matter what secrets lay hidden in their daughter's past, no matter how extraordinary she was, they would stand by her side. And maybe, just maybe, that was all they really needed to know. Days turned into weeks, and though the storm of uncertainty had not passed, Thomas and Emma worked together to find peace with the unimaginable truth they now faced. Their lives had been irrevocably changed, and yet, they were learning to adapt. They knew they could not go back to the way things were before. The truth had been laid bare, and they had to find a way forward. As they spent more time with their daughter, Emma's heart began to heal. No matter what secrets the child held within her, she was still her daughter. She had come into this world with no choice of her own, and Emma would not abandon her. The love that had grown between them was undeniable, stronger than anything the child's strange origins could throw at her. Every day she held her daughter, every smile, every small moment of connection, reaffirmed that this child was hers in a way that went beyond blood or biology. For Thomas, the journey was harder. He had always seen the world through the lens of reason, and this situation, this child, defied every law of logic and understanding he held dear. But slowly, he began to realize that there were some things in life that could not be explained, some mysteries that were beyond human comprehension. His daughter's existence wasn't a puzzle to be solved, it was a reality to be embraced. One evening, as they sat together in the nursery, Thomas watched Emma as she lovingly rocked their daughter to sleep. The child was calm, her deep, knowing eyes flicking between the two of them. Thomas had noticed how much she had grown over the past few months, not just physically, but emotionally. There was a serenity to her now, an understanding that seemed far beyond her years. "I've been thinking," Thomas said quietly, breaking the silence that had settled over the room. About everything. The tests, the DNA, the doctors. I wanted answers so badly, I forgot to see what was right in front of me. Emma turned to him, her heart swelling with emotion. She had known this day would come, the day when Thomas would finally accept their daughter for who she was, without trying to change her or figure her out. What do you mean? I've spent so much time looking for explanations, for some scientific reason behind everything, Thomas said, his voice thick with realization. But I see now that it doesn't matter. What matters is that she's here. She's our daughter, and we love her. I was so caught up in the fear of what I didn't understand that I almost lost sight of what really matters. Emma smiled softly, her eyes glistening with tears. You're not alone in this, Thomas. We'll figure it out together. But the most important thing is that we love her. And she loves us. That's all that matters. For the first time in a long while, Thomas felt a sense of peace. The answers they had sought for so long might never come, and perhaps that was okay. The truth wasn't always something that could be neatly packaged into a scientific explanation. Sometimes, the truth was simply that love, family, and acceptance were the most important things. Thomas looked down at his daughter, who was now peacefully sleeping in her mother's arms. Her strange, otherworldly eyes were closed, her features soft with sleep, but there was a warmth to her, a sense of belonging. No matter where she came from, no matter what secrets she held, she was home. And that was enough. You're right, Thomas whispered. She's our daughter. And we'll raise her, no matter what. The silence in the room was no longer heavy with fear and confusion. It was filled with love, acceptance, and a new sense of understanding. Thomas and Emma had found something more important than answers, they had found the strength to embrace the unknown together. They didn't need to have all the answers. They didn't need to solve every mystery. All they needed was each other, and the child who had brought them closer than they ever could have imagined. As they sat there, the weight of their journey slowly began to lift. They had walked through a storm of uncertainty, but now, they stood on the other side, stronger and more united than ever before. And in that moment, they both knew that no matter what came next, they would face it as a family. The child who had once seemed like an enigma was now the heart of their world. The mystery of her origins no longer mattered. What mattered was the love they shared, and the lessons they had learned along the way. Sometimes, life didn't offer simple answers. But as long as you had love, everything else could be figured out in time.